This story is titled, My Parents Texted Me Not to Come to Family Gathering because they were disowning me. I simply replied okay, but immediately stopped sponsoring them and all their accounts got blocked. After that, they were begging for forgiveness and financial help. Hey Reddit, my name is Marcus and I'm 29 years old. For the past 15 years, I've dedicated my life to building my father's construction materials supply business. What started as weekend inventory work during high school summers eventually became my full-time career after college. I thought I was building something meaningful, something that would last. I was wrong. One day, everything changed with a single voicemail message. My father called while I was wrapping up at the office, but I missed it. When I played the message back, his voice was cold and matter-of-fact. Don't bother coming. We're cutting ties. 7 words that ended 15 years of my life. The next day, he handed my role over to my younger brother Tyler, who had barely 4 years of experience compared to my decade and a half of dedication. I didn't argue with him. I didn't beg for an explanation or try to change his mind. Instead, I simply walked away, took what was rightfully mine, and watched as everything my father had spent decades building collapsed around him. They had backed the wrong horse, and now they were about to learn just how much they had relied on me. Here's exactly how it all went down. My father started his construction materials supply business back in the 1990s, operating out of a simple storage unit in Tampa. It was humble beginnings, but he had vision and determination. 3 decades later, that small operation had grown into a thriving enterprise, generating $3.8 million in annual revenue. We had upgraded to a massive 45,000 square foot facility in Orlando, and I had been there for nearly every step of that journey. My involvement began during high school, when I spent my summer breaks learning the inventory system and understanding the flow of materials through the warehouse. After college, I transitioned into operations full-time, and 4 years ago, I had spearheaded the complete modernization of our back-end systems. The business had become solid, profitable, and efficient under my management. We specialized in Florida construction materials for building sites, manufacturing plants, and major development projects. Our inventory included high-end concrete mixers, specialized steel framework systems, and custom fabrication equipment, the kind of specialized gear that keeps Florida's construction boom running smoothly. Most people outside the industry never think about these materials, but they're absolutely essential for any major construction project in the state. Our client list read like a who's who of Florida's construction sector. We had contracts with most of the major players in the industry, and my father never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that he had built this empire from nothing. What he conveniently left out of his self-made success story was the $75,000 loan he had received from my grandfather, money that he never paid back. In today's dollars, that represented around $180,000 of startup capital that he got completely free. It wasn't exactly the bootstrap narrative he liked to promote, but the truth rarely interfered with my father's version of events. My brother Tyler represented everything wrong with the family dynamic. At 24 years old, he had taken a completely different path through life than I had. While I was spending sweltering summer days in 98-degree warehouse heat, counting inventory and learning the business from the ground up, Tyler was enjoying his time at the University of Florida. After graduation, he spent months wandering around Europe, supposedly networking and making connections. Of course, mom and dad paid for absolutely everything: his tuition, his apartment, his car, and even his lifestyle expenses. I'll never forget the incident with Tyler's convertible Mercedes during his sophomore year. He managed to total that expensive car, and within a week, it had been completely replaced. Mom was his biggest advocate in that situation, insisting to Dad that he needs reliable transportation for networking events. Meanwhile, I was driving a 12-year-old Honda with 195,000 miles on the odometer, a car that I had purchased and maintained with my own money. Mom never pushed for me the way she consistently advocated for Tyler. The favoritism was obvious, but I had learned to accept it as just another part of our family's dysfunction. When Tyler finally joined the family business 4 years ago, Dad immediately gave him a vice president title, despite the fact that he had absolutely zero experience in our industry. Tyler's educational background consisted of a communications degree, which essentially meant he had spent 4 years partying and making connections with other wealthy students. His entire professional resume consisted of a single summer internship at a marketing firm, and even that position had been secured because his college roommate's father was the CEO of the company. Yet somehow, My father was convinced that Tyler was qualified to run sales operations at a multi-million-dollar construction materials company. It was a decision that would prove to be catastrophic, but at the time, I kept my concerns to myself and tried to focus on my own responsibilities. The first major incident that revealed Tyler's true character happened when we landed a significant contract with a major construction company. This wasn't just any ordinary deal. I had spent 7 months meticulously setting up the logistics for this partnership. The process involved building a completely custom inventory system tailored to their specific needs and requirements. I had sacrificed countless nights, often working until 2:30 in the morning, and gave up most of my weekends to make this deal happen. The dedication was so intense that my girlfriend at the time ended up breaking up with me because she felt like I was married to the job instead of our relationship. On the day of the final presentation to their procurement team, Tyler casually strolled into the meeting 25 minutes late. Without any hesitation or acknowledgement of the work I had put in, he took control of my PowerPoint presentation and introduced himself to the clients as the architect behind this entire partnership. When one of the procurement team members asked a detailed technical question about implementation timelines, Tyler completely fumbled the response. I had to jump in and provide the accurate information to save the presentation. Later that same day, Tyler cornered me in the warehouse for what he clearly intended to be an intimidating confrontation. "Don't ever make me look bad in front of clients again," he said, jabbing his finger directly at my chest in a threatening manner. I replied calmly, "I was just answering their question." His response revealed everything about his priorities and his complete lack of professionalism. "Next time, write it down and pass me a note," he demanded. "I'm the face of sales now, and you're the back-end guy. Know your place." Looking back, I should have quit that very day. The writing was already on the wall about how this family dynamic would play out in the business world. Instead, I swallowed my pride and continued working, telling myself that I was doing it for the company my father had built, not for Tyler's ego or his need to feel important. The construction company contract ended up being worth $1.9 million in revenue during the first year alone. But when it came time to distribute commissions and recognition, Tyler's name was the only one that appeared on the paperwork. My 7 months of sacrifice and technical expertise were completely ignored. The situation with Tyler continued to deteriorate over the following year. I discovered that he had been systematically inflating his commission numbers through various deceptive practices. He would take credit for contract renewals that were completely automatic and required no sales effort whatsoever. He claimed ownership of deals that other sales representatives had actually closed, somehow managing to get his name attached to their hard work. Most audaciously, he even created phantom leads that would magically convert at the last minute, perfectly timed to help him hit his quarterly targets and earn maximum bonuses. When I finally gathered enough evidence to confront this behavior, I spent an entire week compiling a comprehensive spreadsheet comparison that clearly documented all of Tyler's fraudulent activities. I presented this evidence to my father, expecting him to take immediate action to address the obvious misconduct. Instead, he brushed off my concerns with a dismissive wave, claiming that this was simply how business gets done in Florida. His willingness to overlook Tyler's unethical behavior was both shocking and revealing about his true priorities. Despite my father's refusal to act, I continued quietly documenting everything that happened in the business. Over the past 2 quarters, I had been building a comprehensive case, keeping detailed records of financial irregularities, questionable decisions, and Tyler's ongoing misconduct. I wasn't actively planning to use any of this information at the time, but something deep inside told me to be prepared for whatever might come next. After 15 years of watching my father operate and make decisions, I had developed a strong instinct for recognizing when trouble was brewing. Then came the day that changed everything. I noticed a missed call on my phone from my father at 6:47 p.m. on a Wednesday evening. I had just successfully closed our biggest deal of the quarter without any assistance from Tyler, and I was feeling pretty good about the accomplishment. My father and I weren't the type of family that checked in with each other daily, so I figured the call had to be related to the quarterly numbers or some other business matter. I hit play on the voicemail while I continued packing up my things for the day, half listening as I shoved my laptop into its carrying case. That's when I heard the 7 words that would end our relationship forever. "Don't bother coming to the family reunion. We're cutting ties." I froze completely, with one hand still gripping my laptop zipper. These 7 words were delivered in the same flat, emotionless tone that my father typically used to cancel a routine lunch meeting. I stood there in my office for a full minute, letting his voice echo in my head as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The message was cold, efficient, and final, like he was terminating a business contract rather than ending a relationship with his son. After all the years I had invested in the family business, after all the weekends I had sacrificed for the company's success, after all the personal relationships I had put on hold to help build his empire, this was how he chose to end things. A voicemail message. No explanation, no discussion, no opportunity for me to understand what had led to this decision. Just a cold, calculated dismissal delivered through a recorded message. The family reunion he mentioned wasn't just a casual social gathering. It was our annual meeting at my father's ranch in the Everglades region, an event that had been happening since I was a child. More importantly, this reunion served as our primary forum for discussing the business direction for the coming year. We would hash out major strategic decisions, set compensation levels, and plan for future growth. By cutting me out of this meeting, my father wasn't just excluding me from a family event. He was effectively cutting me out of the business entirely. Through my office window, I could see directly into my father's office, where he and Tyler were both hunched over paperwork, nodding in agreement, and clearly engaged in serious planning discussions. My father never consulted with me in that collaborative way anymore, and suddenly the reason became crystal clear. They weren't just planning the next quarter's operations, they were planning my complete exit from the company. I picked up my phone, my thumbs hovering over the screen as a dozen different angry replies ran through my mind. Each potential response was more heated than the last, but ultimately, I settled on typing just a single word: understood. If my father wanted to end our relationship this way, I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of begging for explanations or trying to change his mind. But if he thought he could simply cut me out of the business without facing any consequences, he was about to learn how wrong he could be. I reached down and pulled out the thick, leather-bound ledger from my bottom desk drawer, the official business partnership document that contained all the key signatures and agreements. There was my name, written in neat black ink right next to my parents' signatures, representing 15 years of my life and labor. With a slow, deliberate stroke, I crossed my name off the document completely. The sound of the pen cutting through the paper felt like a physical act of separation, a symbolic severing of the ties that had bound me to this company for so long. I took a clear photograph of the modified document with my phone, ensuring that the crossed-out signature was clearly visible. Then I opened my email and composed a brief message to my personal lawyer, attaching the photo and typing. Need to talk tomorrow. Family business situation changing. Let's discuss options. I hit send, locked my office door, and walked out of the building without looking back even once. If my father wanted to play this game, I wasn't going to let him hold my future hostage. He had made his choice, and now I was going to make mine. The next day, I moved quickly and decisively. I canceled my flight to the Everglades Region Ranch, where the family reunion was scheduled to take place. I erased the event date from my calendar entirely, treating it like any other canceled business appointment. Then, I sent a formal email to my parents, confirming my intention to step away from the business completely and requesting a full financial audit of all company operations. There were no pleasantries in the message, no attempts to patch things up or find a compromise. I used the cold, clear language of a businessman walking away from a deal that had gone bad. 15 years of my life had been invested in that company. 15 years of missed vacations, canceled dates, and postponed personal plans. And for what? To be dismissed with a 7-word voicemail message like I was some expendable employee rather than the person who had helped build the business from the ground up. I had turned down a promising job offer at Disney's logistics division right after college, specifically to help my father expand the business. That decision had cost me alternative career paths and potential opportunities, and now it felt like a complete waste. While I waited for my lawyer to return my call, I took several important protective steps. I quietly removed my name from the business loan documents where I was listed as a personal guarantor. This wasn't an emotional decision driven by hurt feelings. It was pure risk management. If they were cutting me out of the decision-making process, I wasn't going to remain financially liable for their future mistakes. I made a few additional calls to my lawyer to begin the formal separation process, approaching the entire situation strategically rather than emotionally. After all, my father had always taught me that business is business, and I was simply applying the lessons he had drilled into me over the years. While I waited for the legal process to begin, I took the precaution of backing up every relevant document I had access to as an operations director. This included detailed financial reports, comprehensive client lists, vendor contracts, and anything else that might prove useful if the situation turned ugly. I wasn't planning to steal proprietary information, but I needed to protect myself and my interests. When you've spent 15 years building systems and processes, you know exactly where all the important information is stored and how the business really operates behind the scenes. About an hour after I sent my formal email, Tyler sent me a text message that perfectly captured his arrogant attitude. Always knew you'd bail when things got tough. Don't worry, I've got plenty of ideas to fix your outdated systems. Bet Dad wishes he'd put me in charge years ago. I didn't bother responding to his juvenile taunting. There was no point in adding fuel to the fire or engaging in a petty argument. Instead, I simply took a screenshot of his message for my records and continued working on my exit strategy. Tyler had always been someone who talked big but delivered little, and his ideas typically involved spending money we didn't have on consultants we didn't need. The next morning, I received a text from David, one of our warehouse managers who had been with the company for over a decade. "Your dad just called an emergency meeting," he wrote. "Announced Tyler's taking over your position effective immediately. The guy couldn't tell a circuit breaker from a fuse box if his life depended on it." Apparently, Tyler had been telling my father that I was planning to start my own competing business and had been stealing client information for months. It was complete bullshit, of course, but Tyler had always possessed an uncanny ability to manipulate my father and convince him of whatever narrative served Tyler's interest best. That night, I spent several hours carefully copying all relevant files to my personal storage drives. I took detailed screenshots of administrative access pages, documented every system I had built or implemented, and created a comprehensive record of my contributions to the business. I knew exactly how the situation was going to play out, and I wanted to be prepared for whatever came next. 36 hours later, my phone exploded with activity. I had 82 missed calls from my mother alone, along with dozens more from my sister Jessica and a handful of increasingly desperate attempts from my father. I scrolled through the avalanche of panicked text messages, frantic voicemails, and increasingly urgent emails that had accumulated while I maintained my silence. My father's messages began with cautious, probing questions, like someone carefully testing thin ice before stepping onto it. But as the hours passed and my silence stretched longer, his communications became more urgent and desperate. His words carried something I hadn't heard in his voice in years: genuine fear. "Marcus, you need to call me about the credit line paperwork," one message said. "It's important." Another followed. "Son, we can discuss this like men. Call me back." As his panic intensified, the messages became more threatening. "Marcus, this isn't a game. The company's at stake here." His accountant, a humorless man from Jacksonville whom I had never particularly liked, left a voicemail that practically crackled with anxiety. "Marcus, we need to talk urgently," he said, his voice strained. "The credit line is in jeopardy without your signature." I leaned back in my chair and allowed a slow smile to cross my face. I had given them a significant head start, but now the storm was finally hitting, and I was just getting started with my counterattack. What my father and Tyler hadn't realized was that 4 years ago, when I had modernized our entire business infrastructure, I had inadvertently made myself absolutely essential to the daily operations. This wasn't something I had planned intentionally. I had actually documented everything meticulously and tried to create systems that others could manage. But some aspects of running a complex business simply can't be transferred overnight, no matter how well they're documented. There were the personal relationships I had carefully cultivated with our main suppliers over the years. These weren't just professional connections. They were built on trust, reliability, and mutual respect that had developed through countless interactions. There was the custom code that kept our inventory management system running smoothly, code that I had written and modified over time to meet our specific needs. And there was the specialized knowledge of our clients' unique requirements and preferences that I had accumulated through years of direct interaction and problem solving. By the third day, the messages had escalated from confused to absolutely desperate. My mother's voicemails were breathless and panicked, her words tumbling over each other as she tried to make sense of what was happening. My sister Jessica attempted a softer, more diplomatic approach. "Hey Marcus, I don't know what's going on between you and Dad, but I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," she said in one message. "Let's talk and figure this out." I didn't answer any of their calls. Jessica meant well, and had always tried to be a peacemaker in our family, but I knew my father too well to believe this was simply a misunderstanding that could be resolved with a conversation. On the fourth day, I received an email from the bank that managed our family business accounts. I opened it cautiously, bracing myself for whatever new financial disaster my parents and Tyler had managed to create. As I scanned through the formal language of the document, my jaw dropped in disbelief. My father and Tyler had quietly attempted to transfer all the remaining company funds into a separate account that bore only their names. They had even initiated the legal paperwork necessary to completely dissolve the original LLC, which would have effectively erased me from the business picture entirely. The only reason the bank had flagged these transactions and sent me a notification was because my name was still listed on several of the original incorporation documents. More importantly, my signature was required for any major financial changes according to the operating agreement that I had insisted on implementing when we restructured the business 4 years earlier. This was a detail that my father had probably forgotten about in his rush to push me out of the company, but it was about to become the key to everything that followed. That was the final straw. My father wasn't just trying to end our family relationship or restructure the business. He and Tyler were attempting to cut me off completely and permanently. They wanted a clean break that would leave me with nothing to show for 15 years of dedicated work. They probably assumed I would be too shocked, hurt, or emotionally devastated to take any meaningful action. They didn't realize that by crossing this particular line, they had given me the perfect legal justification to hit back with everything I had. I took a deep breath and called my lawyer immediately. We had a long, intense conversation about the situation, reviewing all the evidence I had gathered and discussing the various legal options available to me. By the end of our discussion, the wheels were already in motion for something much bigger than simply removing my name from a business loan or walking away quietly. "They've made this very easy for us," my lawyer said with a tone of professional satisfaction. Attempted financial fraud is pretty straightforward to prove when the documentation is this clear. But are you absolutely sure you want to go this route? Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back to the way things were. I didn't hesitate for even a moment. "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "They started this war when they tried to steal everything I've worked for. I'm just making sure I'm the one who wins it." The next morning, I dedicated myself to pulling together every scrap of documentation I had accumulated about the family business over the years. I spent hours methodically compiling a comprehensive dossier that highlighted every questionable decision, every shady financial move, and every suspicious transaction that my father and brother had ever made. Years of bottled-up frustration and carefully suppressed concerns now fueled my laser-sharp focus as I built what would become their downfall. My father had developed a long-standing habit of categorizing personal expenses as business write-offs, treating the company credit cards like his personal piggy bank. Tyler's commission reports were consistently inflated with phantom deals and stolen credit for other people's work. There were consulting fees paid to my cousin's web design company that had never actually delivered a functional website despite receiving thousands of dollars in payments. I documented cash deals with certain vendors that mysteriously never appeared in our official accounting books, creating a paper trail that raised serious questions about tax compliance and business practices. When I finished compiling everything, I had assembled a thick, damning stack of evidence that painted a clear picture of systematic financial misconduct. I filed an official complaint with the bank, requesting that they freeze all company accounts pending a comprehensive audit of our business practices. I also submitted a detailed request to the IRS asking them to investigate possible tax fraud, attaching the most incriminating pieces of evidence from my carefully assembled dossier. I wasn't entirely certain whether the charges would stick in court, but I was definitely willing to find out. For good measure, I decided to send the complete package of evidence to my father's biggest and most important client, a man named Robert, who had been a longtime family friend and business partner. Robert had known my grandfather personally and had given my father his very first major contract decades ago, helping to establish the foundation of our business. He represented old-school Florida construction money, the kind of businessman who valued loyalty and straightforward dealing above all else. I knew that Robert wouldn't appreciate learning about the questionable way my father had been conducting business operations, especially if those practices could potentially expose Robert's own company to legal liability. I had already taken steps to protect myself financially before launching this comprehensive attack. I had secured all my personal finances by moving my assets to completely separate accounts that had no connection to the family business. I had also made sure my name was removed from any company credit lines that could potentially make me liable for their debts or legal troubles. If they wanted to come after me in retaliation, I was no longer financially exposed to their actions. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment overlooking downtown Orlando, watching the city lights blink on as darkness settled over the area. Part of me experienced a small twinge of regret about how dramatically the situation had escalated beyond what anyone could have anticipated. But there was another part of me, the part that remembered every slight, every time Tyler had been favored over me, every dismissal of my contributions to the business, that felt nothing but cold, calculated satisfaction. My phone buzzed with a text message from David, our warehouse manager. "Complete chaos here today," he wrote. "Your brother tried to access the inventory system and somehow managed to crash the entire server. Your dad's been yelling at everyone all day. Hope whatever's going on between you all gets worked out, man." I smiled grimly as I read his message. They were already learning just how much they had relied on my technical expertise and operational knowledge, and it had only been 4 days since I walked out. That same night, my phone buzzed again with an incoming call from Jessica. I hesitated for a moment before answering, weighing my options carefully. Despite everything that was happening with the rest of the family, I didn't want to drag Jessica into the middle of this increasingly toxic mess. She had always been the most reasonable member of our family, consistently trying to maintain some level of functionality when my father's ego and Tyler's entitlement created conflict. "Marcus, I know you're angry, and I honestly don't blame you for feeling that way," she said when I picked up. "But can we talk face to face? Just you and me without anyone else involved?" I paused, considering her request. Despite my determination to see this conflict through to its conclusion, I still cared about Jessica and didn't want our relationship to become collateral damage in the war I was waging against my father and Tyler. "All right," I finally agreed. "Let's meet tomorrow and talk this through." The next day, I met Jessica at a steakhouse in North Orlando that we had both frequented during better times. She was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, positioned so she could keep an eye on the door, a habit she had developed during years of trying to manage family drama. When she saw me enter, she straightened up slightly, but her facial expression remained serious and concerned rather than accusatory. Jessica had always served as the bridge between different factions of our family. At 26 years old, she was 3 years younger than me, but 5 years older than Tyler, which had given her a unique perspective on the family dynamics that had shaped all of our lives. Over the years, she had perfected the delicate art of maintaining neutrality during family conflicts, often serving as a translator between family members who were no longer speaking to each other directly. "Marcus, what the hell is going on?" she asked, keeping her voice low to avoid attracting attention from other diners. "Dad's completely losing it over this situation. Mom's having what looks like a nervous breakdown. They're convinced you're actively trying to destroy the business that Dad spent his entire life building. And Tyler is just making everything 10 times worse by threatening to sue you for everything you're worth." She deserved to know the truth about what had really happened, but I also didn't want to drag her any deeper into the increasingly complicated legal and financial mess that was developing. "They tried to cut me out completely," I explained to Jessica, choosing my words carefully. "Dad and Tyler have been systematically moving money into a separate account that only has their names on it. They were trying to dissolve the original LLC behind my back, which would have left me with absolutely nothing after 15 years of building this business." Her eyes widened in shock as the implications of what I was telling her began to sink in. "That can't be right," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Dad wouldn't just—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought, but I could see the doubt creeping into her expression. No, there must be some kind of mistake here. I leaned forward slightly. "What about Tyler? Would he do something like this?" I asked pointedly, knowing that she had her own complicated history with our younger brother. She looked away, unable to deny the possibility. Tyler had always been manipulative, even in his dealings with Jessica. I remembered the incident from a few years ago when he had borrowed money from her college fund, promising to pay it back promptly, but never following through. Dad had covered up that situation, of course, just like he covered up most of Tyler's questionable behavior. I pushed a thin folder across the table toward her. It contained carefully selected pages from my comprehensive dossier, just enough documentation to make my point without overwhelming her with the full scope of the financial misconduct I had uncovered. The folder included bank transfer requests, questionable invoices, and email exchanges where my father and Tyler had explicitly asked their accountant to expedite the separation process and remove me from all company documentation. Jessica flipped through the papers slowly, her expression growing more troubled with each page. "Jesus Christ, Marcus, this is a lot of money," she said, her fingers stopping on a highlighted bank statement. $85,000 just gone in a single transfer. She paused, tapping the document with her index finger. Where did all this money go? Yes, I replied, leaning back in my chair. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. They've been systematically siphoning off funds for months, possibly even years. I caught them trying to transfer $165,000 to a private account that only had their names on it, marked in the books as business development expenses. There's no legitimate business purpose for that kind of transaction. I leaned closer to emphasize the seriousness of the situation. Jessica, if I hadn't reacted when I did, I would have been legally liable for all of their actions. My name is still on the loan documents and tax forms as a business partner. I could have been held personally responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and potentially fraudulent transactions. She closed the folder and pressed her palm flat against it, as if trying to contain the information inside. You have to talk to them, she said firmly, though her voice carried less conviction than her words suggested. There's got to be another explanation for all of this. He's not usually this stupid about business decisions. And what about Tyler? I asked again, forcing her to confront the reality of our brother's character. This time, she didn't attempt to defend him or offer an alternative explanation. I gave them a chance to explain everything, I continued. You know what Dad did instead of having a conversation with me? He left me a 7-word voicemail that essentially ended our relationship, and then he put Tyler in my position the very next day. There was no discussion, no attempt to work things out, just a cold dismissal followed by immediate replacement. Please, Marcus, just don't destroy everything, she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone. Mom's already talking about selling the house to cover their legal expenses. If this situation completely blows up, I honestly don't know what they'll do financially. I met her gaze directly. I'm not the one who started this war, Jessica, but I promise you that I'm going to be the one who finishes it. That evening, I received an official notice from the bank confirming that the freeze on all company accounts had been successfully implemented. My lawyer had effectively leveraged the operating agreement that I had insisted on implementing 4 years earlier, the agreement that required unanimous approval from all business partners for any financial transfers exceeding $60,000. Combined with the substantial evidence of unauthorized transactions that I had provided, the bank had flagged over $280,000 in suspicious financial activity, with several large transfers still pending and now blocked. I could picture my father and Tyler sitting in that sterile Jacksonville office, watching helplessly as their carefully constructed financial plans crumbled before their eyes. I wasn't just cutting myself loose from their sinking ship. I was actively setting the entire operation on fire and watching it burn. I understood the business operations well enough to grasp exactly what a frozen bank account meant for their day-to-day operations. Vendors wouldn't receive payments for materials and services, which would damage crucial business relationships. Employee payroll would be delayed, potentially causing key personnel to quit or seek employment elsewhere. Most critically, the line of credit they relied on for major equipment purchases and inventory management would be jeopardized, effectively paralyzing their ability to fulfill existing contracts. It was the corporate equivalent of a massive heart attack, sudden, devastating, and potentially fatal. I woke up the next morning to find my phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. My email inbox was completely flooded with messages from the bank's fraud investigation department, urgent communications from my lawyer, and increasingly panicked messages from my father's accountant. The comprehensive audit I had requested was proceeding faster than anyone had expected, and it was clearly generating significant concern among all parties involved. I scrolled through the latest updates from the bank's investigation team. They had frozen over $450,000 in assets across several different accounts and had flagged an additional $230,000 in unexplained withdrawals dating back 7 months. This represented a complete financial stranglehold that was more than sufficient to shut down normal business operations entirely. My father had left 3 separate voicemails overnight, each one more desperate and frantic than the previous message. Marcus, son, please call me back. I don't know what you think you know about our business practices, but you're making a terrible mistake here, said the first message. Call me back immediately. We can work this out like reasonable adults. I deleted all 3 messages without bothering to listen to them completely. An hour later, Jessica called again, her voice carrying a tone of barely controlled stress. Marcus, what exactly did you do? She asked. They're completely freaking out over there. Dad's talking about hiring lawyers and pressing criminal charges against you for business sabotage. Mom's in full-scale panic mode and Tyler is making wild promises about fixing everything if they just give him complete control of the remaining assets. I wasn't surprised by their reaction. They had never been particularly skilled at handling situations when their carefully laid plans went sideways or encountered unexpected resistance. "I did what I had to do to protect myself," I replied evenly. Dad made his strategic move by cutting me out. Tyler took over my position, and I made my countermove in response. I'm not backing down from this fight. There was a long silence on Jessica's end of the line before she spoke again. "Fine," she said, with a tone of resigned acceptance. "Meet with them one last time, for my sake if nothing else. Give them a chance to explain their side of the story." I hesitated, considering her request. I owed Jessica at least that much consideration, given that she was the only family member who had tried to remain neutral and reasonable throughout this entire mess. "All right," I finally agreed. "But this is absolutely the last time I'm willing to sit down with them." As I hung up the phone, my lawyer called with an important update about the situation. The bank's preliminary audit had already uncovered enough serious red flags to warrant a much more thorough and comprehensive investigation into all aspects of the business finances. My father and Tyler were now looking at potential fraud charges if the current trajectory continued much further. "You need to decide exactly how far you want to take this," my lawyer said in a serious tone. "Right now, you've got significant leverage in this situation. They're clearly scared about what you might reveal, and this might be the optimal time to negotiate a settlement that allows you to walk away with your fair share of the business assets." I considered his advice carefully. A negotiated settlement would certainly be cleaner and faster than a prolonged legal battle. But something deep inside me resisted the idea of letting them off easy. This wasn't just about money anymore. It had become something much more personal. We arranged to meet at my parents' house in North Orlando that evening. I had grown up in this house, spent my entire teenage years in the bedroom upstairs, and brought my first serious girlfriend home for dinner at that dining room table. Now, walking up to the front door, it felt like I was entering enemy territory rather than returning to my childhood home. My mother opened the door with a forced smile and gave me a quick, awkward hug. She looked exhausted and older than I remembered, with stress lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before this conflict began. Inside the living room, my father was standing with his arms crossed, trying to project an image of confidence and control despite the dire circumstances. Tyler sat in the leather recliner like it was his personal throne, with his legs spread wide in an exaggerated display of false confidence that couldn't quite mask his obvious anxiety about the situation. "Sit down," my father demanded, in a tone that suggested he still believed he was in control of this meeting. I settled into a chair across from them, taking a moment to notice how every family photograph displayed throughout the room featured Tyler prominently in the center, with me consistently pushed to the edges or partially obscured. Had the photos always been arranged this way? Or was I only now noticing this pattern because of everything that had happened? "So what exactly is this all about?" I asked, deciding to let them make the first move in this confrontation. My father turned toward me, his face flushed with a combination of anger and barely controlled frustration. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Marcus?" he demanded. "Freezing our business accounts, ordering financial audits, getting investigators involved? You're actively trying to destroy everything that I've spent my entire life building from nothing." I met his angry gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm trying to protect myself after you attempted to cut me out of the business without any warning whatsoever. Did you really think I wouldn't notice $280,000 disappearing into a private account that only has your name and Tyler's name on it? Did you think I would just sit back passively while you and Tyler systematically gutted the company that I helped build over 15 years? Tyler stood up abruptly, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. "You've always been resentful of Dad's success and my contributions to this business," he declared with his characteristic arrogance. "You've been actively trying to undermine me from the very first day I joined this company, and now you're showing your true colors." My father's expression hardened as he stepped closer to where I was sitting. "You have absolutely no idea what kind of damage you've caused," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I've got major deals in the pipeline that are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I have significant investments in place that could transform this entire operation. Tyler has been developing relationships with new clients who could take our revenue to the next level. If you keep these accounts frozen, it could completely ruin everything we've worked to accomplish." "That's not my problem," I shot back firmly. "You made your decision when you tried to cut me out of the business entirely and replace me with Tyler. I'm simply protecting what's rightfully mine after 15 years of dedicated work." There was a long, tense silence as the implications of our positions became clear to everyone in the room. Then Tyler leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk that I had learned to despise over the years. "Don't worry about it, Dad," he said, with completely misplaced confidence. "I'll modernize this entire company now that Marcus is finally out of the way. His systems are completely ancient and outdated. I've got contacts at Microsoft who can set us up with real enterprise-level solutions that will revolutionize our operations." I couldn't help but laugh at Tyler's ridiculous boasting. He had never even successfully logged into our inventory management system, let alone understood the complex processes that kept the business running smoothly. His grandiose promises about modernization were typical Tyler big talk with absolutely no substance behind it. "Tyler's absolutely right," my father said, nodding enthusiastically at his favorite son's empty promises. "We were already planning to completely update the entire operation anyway. This situation is just accelerating our timeline for necessary improvements." As I looked at my father, I suddenly saw something that I had never noticed before in all our years of working together. Beneath all his aggressive bluster and angry threats, he was genuinely terrified. He was scared that the business empire he had spent decades building was slipping away from his control, and instead of facing that reality honestly, he was doubling down on the fantasy that Tyler could somehow magically save everything. My father leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "Fine," he said. "You want to play hardball with your own family? You want to burn down everything we've built together? I'll show you what it really looks like when this family goes to war." I held his threatening gaze steadily, refusing to back down. I had come too far and sacrificed too much to retreat now, regardless of his intimidation tactics. Jessica stepped between us, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Stop it, all of you," she said firmly. "This isn't solving anything or helping anyone. We're supposed to be family." I stood up and grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. "You wanted me here, Jessica, and I came because I respect you. But I'm completely done trying to reason with them." I turned toward the door, then paused to look back at my father and Tyler one final time. "You both made your choices, and now you'll have to live with the consequences." I walked out of the house, shutting the door firmly behind me with a sense of finality. As I got into my car, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. The message was from my lawyer, and the subject line immediately caught my attention. My parents and Tyler had just filed a comprehensive lawsuit against me, claiming that I had deliberately sabotaged the business operations and illegally seized control of their financial accounts. I let out a short, bitter laugh and tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. So this was how they wanted to escalate the situation, taking it to court with a full legal battle. Fine. I had given them multiple opportunities to handle this reasonably and walk away with some dignity intact. Now I would make absolutely sure they had nothing left to fight for. The lawsuit hit me much harder than I had anticipated. My father and Tyler had decided to go completely nuclear, accusing me of everything from embezzlement to corporate sabotage in their legal filings. Their claims were absolutely outrageous and completely unfounded, but the potential stakes were very real and serious. If they somehow managed to convince a judge that I had illegally seized control of their business accounts, I could be looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages and potentially even criminal charges. I had expected them to be angry about my actions, but I hadn't expected them to be stupid enough to make such wild accusations that could easily backfire. It was like they were practically begging to have their own financial crimes exposed during the discovery process. They had apparently decided that the best defense was a completely reckless offense, regardless of the consequences. I spent the following week completely buried in legal documents, with my lawyer working around the clock to counter each new motion and accusation they filed against me. They had even dragged Jessica into the mess by calling her as a witness against me, probably hoping that involving her would somehow break my resolve or make me more willing to negotiate a settlement on their terms. Then, just 2 days before our first scheduled court appearance, I received an unexpected message from my father's accountant. "Marcus, we need to meet privately," the message read. "There are things you need to know about this situation that could change everything." I agreed to meet him that night at a quiet diner off Interstate 4, curious about what information he might have that was worth the risk of contacting me directly. He was already seated at a corner booth when I arrived, looking extremely nervous and constantly glancing around the restaurant as if he expected to be caught at any moment. He waved me over urgently, then leaned forward and lowered his voice to barely above a whisper. "Marcus, I shouldn't be here talking to you," he said, nervously adjusting his glasses. "If they find out I'm meeting with you..." He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. The IRS has been conducting their own investigation into some of our business filings, he continued, his anxiety becoming more apparent with each word. With this lawsuit and the court-ordered audit, I could be looking at serious criminal charges for my role in covering up their financial irregularities. I need to get ahead of this situation before it completely destroys my career and my freedom. Just tell me what this is about, I said, settling into the booth across from him. He leaned even closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Your brother? He's been systematically hiding money for years through a complex network of financial schemes. We're talking about offshore accounts, shell companies, and completely under-the-table cash deals that never appeared in any official records. Your father only discovered the full extent of Tyler's activities recently, but he's been actively covering for him instead of reporting the illegal activity. I had suspected some level of financial misconduct based on what I had already uncovered, but this sounded much more serious and extensive than anything I had imagined. How bad are we talking here? I asked. Tax evasion, wire fraud, and possibly even money laundering, he replied, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. I've been deliberately falsifying the books at their explicit instruction for several years. But this lawsuit, if it goes to the discovery phase, absolutely everything will be exposed. I can't risk losing my professional license or my freedom over their criminal activities. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small flash drive, sliding it across the table toward me. Everything you need to completely destroy them is contained on this drive, he said. Bank statements, wire transfer records, fraudulent contracts, and documentation of every illegal transaction. Your brother has been systematically bleeding the company dry for years, and your father has been actively helping him cover up the evidence. There's enough information here to send them both to federal prison. That night, I spent hours carefully reviewing all the files contained on the flash drive. The scope of their criminal activity was absolutely staggering. Over $850,000 had been quietly siphoned out of the company through various fraudulent schemes, with Tyler's fingerprints all over every transaction, and my father's signature approving most of the illegal activity. There were equipment purchases that had never actually happened, with the money diverted to Tyler's personal accounts. Consulting fees had been paid to shell companies that Tyler secretly controlled, providing services that were never actually delivered. There was even a completely fake warehouse lease agreement that was actually being used to fund Tyler's luxury condo in Key West. My father had signed off on all of these fraudulent transactions, either with full knowledge of their illegal nature or through willful ignorance that made him equally culpable. The next morning, I sent the complete package of evidence to my lawyer, along with a brief note. Let's get this over with as quickly as possible. By the time our court date finally arrived, my parents and Tyler were completely backed into a corner with no viable options remaining. Their business accounts were still frozen. Their professional reputation was in complete ruins, and now they were staring down the possibility of serious federal criminal charges. My father looked significantly older and more frail as he entered the courtroom, with his usual swagger and confidence completely gone. Tyler wasn't even present for the hearing. He had apparently left town on urgent business the night before, probably realizing that his criminal exposure was too great to risk appearing in court. The judge took less than an hour to review all the evidence and make his ruling. The documentation of financial fraud was simply too overwhelming to ignore or dispute. The case against me was dismissed entirely, and the court ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of my parents' finances and all business operations. I watched my father's face carefully as the full reality of his situation finally sank in. He hadn't just lost control of the business, he had lost everything he had worked his entire life to build. Outside the courthouse, he approached me with his shoulders slumped in defeat, looking every one of his 61 years for the first time I could remember. Marcus, you have to believe me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how bad the situation had gotten with Tyler's activities. I was just trying to protect him because he's my son. For just a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You chose him over me, I said quietly but firmly. Every single time there was a conflict or decision to be made, you chose Tyler. Now you're paying the price for that choice. I walked away, leaving him standing there on the courthouse steps, suddenly looking frail and defeated. A week later, Jessica called me with an update about our parents' situation. She had managed to find them a small apartment in Lakeland, helping them relocate from the family home they could no longer afford to maintain. She didn't ask for my financial assistance, and I didn't offer any directly, but I quietly sent them enough money to cover 3 months of rent. I did this more for Jessica's sake than for theirs, knowing that she was bearing the emotional burden of trying to help them navigate this disaster. "Did you know about Tyler?" Jessica asked during our conversation, her voice heavy with exhaustion and disappointment. "He's completely ruined them, Marcus, and they let him do it. They chose him over you, over me, over everything Dad spent his entire life building." I could hear the deep hurt in her voice, and I realized that it wasn't just me who had been betrayed by our family's dysfunction. Tyler's actions had damaged everyone, including Jessica, who had tried so hard to remain neutral and keep the family together. As for the business itself, it had imploded completely and catastrophically. The comprehensive forensic audit revealed that Tyler had been systematically siphoning money from the company for years through an elaborate network of fraudulent schemes. The company was drowning in debt that had been carefully concealed through creative accounting, and most of our major clients had immediately jumped ship when news of the financial scandal hit the Orlando business press. The warehouse facility was shuttered and locked up, with all the equipment sold at auction to pay creditors. Tyler had simply vanished without a trace. According to the last information Jessica had been able to gather, he was somewhere in Mexico, completely ignoring all attempts by the family to contact him. He had apparently managed to escape with approximately $350,000 of the company's money, leaving our parents to face the legal and financial consequences of his criminal activities alone. I signed the final legal papers that completely dissolved my connection to the failed business, severing the last remaining financial ties between myself and the family disaster. With the settlement money I received and the valuable industry connections I had built over 15 years, I was already 7 weeks into establishing my own construction materials operation in Atlanta. I had deliberately chosen a different state and a different regional market, but I was working in the same industry where my experience and expertise would be most valuable. I had secured a modest warehouse space in an industrial district, brought over 2 of the most trusted employees from the Orlando operation, and started building something that was entirely mine. There would be no family drama, no nepotism, and no favoritism. Just solid business practices based on merit and performance. The freedom from the toxic family dynamics was liberating in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. 3 months later, my father called me directly. His voice sounded different, subdued and defeated, but still carrying that familiar undertone of entitlement that had characterized his personality for as long as I could remember. "Marcus, we need to talk," he said. "Your mother and I have hit a really rough patch financially. Tyler has cleaned us out completely and disappeared to God knows where. We were wrong about the situation, and we were wrong about you. We need your help to rebuild the business from scratch." I let his words hang in the air for a long moment, processing the irony of the situation. Part of me felt vindicated that they were finally admitting their mistakes, but another part of me was simply tired of the entire mess and ready to move on permanently. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said finally. "That chapter of my life is closed forever." "Come on, son," he pleaded, his voice taking on a desperate quality that I had never heard before. "We have absolutely nothing left. We were completely wrong about you and completely wrong about Tyler. We can start over and rebuild the business together, but this time we'll do it the right way. I still have connections across Florida that could help us get back on our feet." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. "No," I said firmly. "You made your choice when you cut me out with that voicemail. Now you have to live with the consequences of that decision. I've moved on, and I'm not going back. Your mother needs her prescription medications," he said, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. "The insurance situation is complicated, and we're having trouble affording." He was clearly trying to use guilt and emotional manipulation to get me to change my mind, the same tactics he had employed throughout my childhood. I felt a brief twinge of concern in my chest, but I quickly suppressed it. He had been manipulating me with guilt and family obligations for years, and I wasn't going to fall for it again. "I already talked to Jessica about Mom's medical needs," I replied. "She's handling all of Mom's prescriptions through her clinic connections. You'll be fine." "You can't just abandon your family like this, Marcus," he said, his tone becoming more accusatory. "After everything I've done for you over the years, you owe us more than this cold treatment." I almost laughed out loud at the audacity of that statement. "Everything you've done for me, Dad?" I replied incredulously. "I worked 15 years building your company while you handed everything to Tyler on a silver platter. You chose him over me at every opportunity, and now you're facing the consequences of that choice. I'm done with this conversation." I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number. Maybe someday in the distant future, I would be ready to have them back in my life in some small, limited capacity. But I would never again tie my financial security or my future to their judgment. And I would never again put myself in a position where they could control or manipulate my life decisions. My father had inadvertently taught me one valuable lesson through all of this chaos. Business is business, and family is something else entirely. The two should never be mixed, because when they are, both inevitably suffer. So what do you guys think? Did I do the right thing by refusing to help them start over after everything that happened? Edit. Hey everyone, it's been a while since I posted this story. Just wanted to let you know that a major update is coming soon. A lot of crazy stuff has gone down since then, so stay tuned for more details. Update. Hey again, it's been 6 months since my main post, and let me tell you, things went absolutely insane. Yesterday, the Orlando Sentinel ran a front-page story about a prominent local businessman's son being arrested in Cancun, Mexico. Yes, that was Tyler. Local authorities picked him up at a luxury beachfront condo where he had been living under a completely fake identity for the past 6 months. He's been extradited back to Florida and is now facing serious federal charges, including wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. According to the district attorney's office, he's looking at 18 to 22 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts. The newspaper article made it sound like Tyler had been caught during some kind of routine investigation by Mexican authorities, suggesting that maybe he had gotten sloppy with his false identity, or someone had recognized him, or perhaps he had managed to anger the wrong people down there. But that's not what actually happened. What the article conveniently didn't mention was that Tyler's exact location, comprehensive evidence of all his financial crimes, and a detailed paper trail documenting every single illegal transaction had been delivered to the FBI, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and the Florida Department of Banking exactly 32 days before his arrest. And all of that evidence had been delivered by me. When Tyler first disappeared to Mexico, I knew that this whole situation wasn't really over yet. Half-finished jobs have always irritated me deeply, and I've never been the type of person to leave loose ends hanging around. So while my parents were crying to Jessica about their lost fortune and ruined lives, I was quietly hiring a private investigator in Mexico City who specializes in finding people who desperately don't want to be found. The investigation took about 2 months and cost me $52,000, but the PI eventually located Tyler living in an $8, $500 per month oceanfront condo in one of Cancun's most exclusive areas. He was driving a brand new Audi, sporting a perfect tan, and dating a local restaurant owner who apparently had no idea about his criminal background. The private investigator sent me photographs of Tyler lounging by his infinity pool, laughing and drinking expensive cocktails like he didn't have a single care in the world. He was living it up like he hadn't just destroyed our family's business and left our parents completely destitute. Basic lifestyle surveillance confirmed that it was definitely Tyler, and the PI managed to get me his new alias. He was going by the name Jack Stevens. I also obtained his new phone number and detailed information about his banking activities in Mexico. From there, I was able to build a comprehensive case against him that went far beyond anything I had previously uncovered. It turned out that those offshore accounts the family accountant had initially flagged were just the tip of a massive iceberg. Tyler had been systematically siphoning company funds since literally his first day on the job, and had managed to set up an incredibly elaborate network of shell companies designed specifically to hide the stolen money. He had created fake vendor accounts that regularly charged our company for completely non-existent services. He had established dummy corporations in Nevada and Wyoming that received substantial consulting fees for work that was never performed. He even had a fake property management company that supposedly leased equipment to our business, equipment that we actually already owned outright. When I calculated the full scope of Tyler's theft, the total amount was close to $1.4 million, significantly more than the $350,000 that my parents had initially thought was missing. This was a massive, sophisticated financial fraud that had been going on for years right under everyone's noses. I want to be completely clear about my motivations here. I didn't pursue Tyler for some noble sense of justice, and I didn't do it to help my parents recover their stolen money. I did it because I always finish what I start, and Tyler's escape to Mexico felt like an insult that demanded a response. When I had assembled everything I needed, bank records, wire transfer confirmations, IP address logs from his account logins, and even photographs of him accessing the stolen accounts from his Mexico hideout, I put together 3 identical packages of evidence. One package went to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, another went to the IRS Criminal Investigations Division, and the third went to the Florida State Banking Commission. I included a detailed timeline of all criminal activity, contact information for every relevant witness, including our family's accountant, who was more than willing to cooperate to save his own skin, and essentially a complete roadmap for successful prosecution. Then I sent all 3 packages via certified mail with no return address and sat back to wait for results. I honestly didn't expect federal law enforcement agencies to move as quickly as they did. These agencies typically take their time with white-collar crime cases, often spending months or even years building their cases before making arrests. But apparently, the evidence I provided was too solid and comprehensive to ignore. It's also possible that they already had Tyler on their radar for other fraudulent activities or scams that I wasn't aware of. Either way, they moved with impressive speed and efficiency. The FBI agent leading the investigation called me yesterday because my name appeared throughout the financial documents as the former operations director of the company. They wanted an official statement from me about Tyler's activities and the business operations. I gave them everything they needed to know for their prosecution, but they have no idea that I was the anonymous source who originally delivered all the evidence to them. And they don't need to know that detail. Tyler is now facing serious federal charges, and according to his court-appointed attorney, apparently his stolen money in Mexico didn't last long enough for him to hire a decent private lawyer. He's desperately trying to negotiate a plea deal. He's offering to testify against our father in exchange for a reduced sentence. Classic Tyler behavior, always looking for the easy way out of any difficult situation, even when it means betraying family members. My father will likely face criminal charges as well, based on his role in covering up Tyler's activities. While he might receive a somewhat lighter sentence since Tyler was clearly the primary architect of the fraud scheme, at his age, even a 6-year prison sentence could mean spending his remaining good years behind bars. My parents' remaining assets have been completely frozen pending the outcome of the criminal case. Jessica told me they might even lose the small apartment that I had helped pay for. She asked if I would consider helping them financially again, and I declined without hesitation. The old family company is now officially and permanently dead. Its assets were liquidated months ago, and its reputation was completely buried by the scandal. Meanwhile, my new operation in Atlanta crossed the $1.2 million revenue mark last quarter. I've hired talented, trustworthy people, implemented solid business systems, and built something clean and functional from the ground up. There's no family drama, no hidden agendas, and definitely no Tyler. Tyler will spend the next several years in federal prison wondering who built such a comprehensive case against him. Was it the family accountant trying to save his own career? A vengeful client who discovered the fraud? Some random banker who spotted financial irregularities? The uncertainty will eat at him every single day, but he'll never know that it was me. He'll never understand the level of detail, planning, and methodical investigation that went into his downfall. He'll never realize that I tracked his every move, documented his crimes with forensic precision, and handed him over to federal authorities on a silver platter. Some people might call what I did revenge. I prefer to think of it as simply closing the loop and finishing what I started. As for my parents, they made their choice when they cut me out of their lives with that 7-word voicemail message. Now they'll have to live with all the consequences of that decision and the choices they made afterward. Jessica is still caught in the middle of this family disaster, and I help her when I can because she's the only one who tried to remain reasonable throughout this entire mess. But that chapter of my life involving my parents is closed permanently and will never be reopened. In the end, Tyler inadvertently taught me something valuable as well. Always be aware of who's really moving the pieces behind the scenes in any situation. In business, as in life, things are rarely what they appear to be on the surface.